Hi everyone, my name's Katie. Welcome back to my videos on my recent pregnancy and all the tips that I'm trying to give you people out there and what I experienced the first time round. I am currently 19 weeks pregnant. So I'm going to talk a bit about that first, and then we're going to talk about telling your employer that you are pregnant if you're in work. So what's going on now? So I am, as I said, 19 weeks pregnant and I'm getting big. I think the bump has slowed down considerably considering how it sprang out in the first 10 weeks. So I'm a lot, so that's just to me now. Probably difficult to see in the pale background, but that's the bump. And the little thing will not stop moving. Oh my god, so I was able to feel it moving from about 14 to 15 weeks pregnant, which they say you should start feeling it around anywhere between 16 and 22, 24 weeks. So I felt it a little bit earlier this time, and I think it's because I knew what I was feeling. So I obviously knew if it was gas or not, whereas the first time I didn't have a clue. So I think I felt my first kicks with my daughter when I was around about 20 weeks pregnant, but this time straight off I knew what it was. So this little thing will not stop moving. I feel like it's awake more times in the day than I am at the moment, especially at night. So on average, I'm woken up about 3 times a night at the moment with kicking. And it's not just like little nudges, it's full on raving party in there. Next week I have my 20-week scan. So in the UK it's what we call our anomaly scan, so where they do certain measurements of certain areas and tell you if there's anything wrong with the growth of the baby, and they tell you if there's any, well, as the name suggests, any anomalies which might show if there's any signs of defects in the growth of the baby. It's always a little bit of a nerve-wracking scan. I found this one a lot more worrying than the 12-week scan with my first child, just because it's the one that they take a lot more time to do, and it's the one that they can see if in more detail whether things are growing nicely or not. So it's always a bit of a nerve-wracking time. Lots of people have been asking if we're going to find out the sex of the baby, and to be honest, before we got pregnant we were talking about it, and we did think it was going to be quite nice to know, just because of the planning. You know, if you've got loads of girl stuff or loads of boy stuff already in the house, then it's always quite nice to know if you should keep it or should start buying some new stuff. But I think I've sort of turned a corner a little bit, and I realised how much I loved not knowing the sex of my daughter before she was born, and how much of a magical moment that was when she came out and my husband handed her, and he just turned around and said it was a girl, it's a girl, and I was convinced she was a boy. I was convinced all the way through that she was a boy. So it was a huge surprise, but a wonderful one, and I realised that regardless of whether this baby is a boy or a girl, as long as it's the good old cliche, as long as it's happy and healthy, I really don't mind what it is. There's not too many nice surprises that you get out of life, and I feel like this is one of them. So I'm feeling a lot more tired this time. You're going to hear me complain about how tired I am a lot. I think it comes with the package now. I'm going to only get more tired, but one thing I noticed is that my mood swings have been horrendous. My poor husband has no idea what's going on in my head, and quite frankly neither do I half the time. I make arguments out of nothing, and it must be really straining for everyone around me, everyone close around me anyway. At work I think I'm okay, but at the moment I think I don't know whether it's hormones or whether it's nerves or lack of sleep or a mixture of all three, but at the moment I'm all over the place. To my husband, I'm so sorry. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about telling your employer that you are pregnant if you were in work. So if you're working at the moment, telling your employer that you're pregnant is always going to be quite a nerve-wracking time, because you're basically telling them that I'm going to take quite a large chunk of time off from my work to raise this little human being. And as much as we'd like to say that it's only maternity leave and then you're going to come back and you're going to work, having a baby has so many implications to your work life that I think any savvy employer would know that. So it is a big chunk of information to give your employer, and it's a lot for an employer to take on. As a lot of people know, you have a lot of rights when you're pregnant with work, and that doesn't go away, but try and be sensitive to your employer as well, because they have a lot of organisation to do as far as trying to organise for you to take that time off and be as supportive as they can for you. So in the UK, you legally have to tell your employer that you are pregnant up to 15 weeks before your due date. By the time you're 25 weeks pregnant, I think it's going to be pretty obvious that you're pregnant. But some people don't. Some people it's not obvious at all. And you are legally allowed to keep that information to yourself until you are 25 weeks pregnant. But after that, if you are expecting maternity leave and statutory maternity pay, you need to tell your employer. So I just thought I would open this bit up to talk about how I spoke to my employer, both with my daughter and this time. So with my daughter, I was in a really, really awkward situation because I was actually interviewed for a promotion when I was 8 weeks pregnant. And I was really torn between whether or not I should have told my employer beforehand that I was pregnant before going to the interview. I told a very, very close colleague of mine that I was pregnant beforehand, who had had a similar situation happen to her. Basically, what she told me was that you can't put your life on hold just because you are pregnant or you're going to have a baby. She said, if God forbid anything should happen to that baby after, or or before, then you have missed out on a wonderful opportunity to have a promotion, and especially in a job that I loved so much and I was so passionate about. So I took her advice and I went ahead with the interview and they offered it to me. At the time, I think I mentioned this in previous episodes, but I actually had broken my hand when I was 5 weeks pregnant with my daughter. So I was actually off on sick leave when I had the interview with my hand in a cast, and then I came back to work about 3 or 4 weeks later, straight into my new role, and then only about this must be about 3, maybe 4 weeks after that, I had my first 12-week scan, and then I had to tell my employer when I was just back from sick leave from a broken hand that I was pregnant, and then I was going to have time off because I was having a baby. As you can imagine, it went down like a lead balloon, but they were very supportive. I think they were just surprised because of the situation. I just don't think they were expecting it. I was in a very female heavy team, so I felt really supported in that respect because lots of people were able to relate to me and able to give me advice, and I just felt more supported as a result, even though it wasn't anything really work related specifically in that time. Just by them giving me their stories just showed that they had all been through it, or most of them had been through it. So this time around, my employer knew I suffered a miscarriage last summer. So me telling her that I was pregnant didn't seem as much of a shock. I decided to tell my direct line manager that I was pregnant quite early. I think I was only about 8 weeks pregnant at the time, and I think I did that mostly out of protection for myself in case the miscarriage happened again. So I told her, and it was not a shock at all. She was totally supportive, and it almost seemed flowing this time. It seemed a lot more calm than when I was pregnant with my daughter, which was all go. So just a few sort of tips and things to tell your boss. I would always advise telling your manager, line manager, or direct employer first, because if you tell colleagues, there is always that little tiny chance that it could slip out, and it's as an employer, you don't particularly want to hear it second hand from someone else. It can be very disorientating, and it could be very stressful for the employer to not know for certain. So if you know and you're comfortable, I would go straight to your employer first and make sure that they're the first to know. Before you go to your employer to announce that you're pregnant, it might be worth downloading or printing off any maternity leave policy that you can get your hands on. In most big corporations, this will be on like a shared HR drive somewhere. It should be readily accessible to you without having to go through someone first. And that will be really helpful for you to read and get an idea what is expected of you and is expected of the company before you go on maternity leave, because that way both your expectations are met before you go ahead and have the baby. On this note, the more information you tell your employer, the better. So if you have the policy in front of you and you've had a discussion with your partner or your family already beforehand, it's always really useful for you to go to your employer and just say, look, I'm this many weeks pregnant, I've looked through the policy already, I want to take this many weeks, months, however, of maternity leave before I have the baby's due, and I was planning on this amount of weeks, months after the baby's born. As I mentioned before, expectations are set, they are managed. Obviously things can change all the time. Babies do not follow a rule book, as we all know, so babies can come early, they come late, everything is quite fluid, but at least you have an idea of what you would like. Be armed with as much information as you can before you tell your employer that you're pregnant. It makes the world of difference. Remember also, in the UK you are allowed to have paid time off for any appointments to do with your pregnancy, and also to attend any antenatal classes. You should be allowed to be able to go to these without any challenge, and you should be paid for them. So if you are also in a situation at work where you feel like you might need more support as a result of being pregnant, then you have every right to ask for it, and your employer should be able to give it to you as much as they possibly can within the workforce. So for example, if you're on quite a physical role, as you're getting bigger and it becomes more of a risk, then you have a right to say ask for more of a desk job, or something that means that you take a step back and do less physical activity. Each workplace should carry out a risk assessment, especially at the beginning, to see and just make sure that it's safe for you to work whilst pregnant, and this should be reviewed all the way through your pregnancy. Obviously, things that you might be able to do when you're 12 weeks pregnant is totally different compared to what you might be able to do when you're, I don't know, 35 weeks pregnant. Me, myself, I'm in the healthcare setting, so I have to do a lot of physical manoeuvring to help and treat patients within the healthcare setting. So at the moment, being 19 weeks pregnant, I am managing without much difficulty, apart from tight trousers. That's about as hard as it gets. But I know for a fact that when I hit sort of 30, 34 weeks pregnant, then I'm going to struggle. So this is something that I'm going to have to consider now, and I certainly will when I get to that stage. So whilst you're pregnant, lots of people ask or presume they are protected from unfavourable treatment, is probably the best way of putting it, whilst they're pregnant, and that is completely true. You are protected against any decisions that might be made against your role as a result of you being pregnant. Okay, this is all under the Equality Act in 2010. And if you live in America, it's called the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. So this is all protected under that act. You are not allowed to be discriminated against as a result of you being pregnant. It doesn't mean that you are completely protected though. You can still be made redundant, but the terms of that redundancy have to be along the lines of any normal redundancy. For example, if the company goes under, or they've got to cut down and you've just been the last person to be employed within that role. But any of those decisions, and they have to have proof, basically got nothing to do with you being pregnant. So if you are made redundant during your pregnancy and you're unsure of their reasons of why you've been made redundant, you have every right to check with that with your employer. These rules also apply that if your terms and conditions of your employment change also. For example, if they suddenly change your hours and days that you work whilst you're pregnant or on maternity leave, you have every right to challenge that. And if you have any worries about it or any questions, by all means you are very welcome to take this up with your HR or even a union if you're a member of a union. They're really, really helpful. So get in touch if you have any queries. So according to nct.org.uk, you need to tell your employer in writing that you are pregnant and that you would like to take maternity leave. You need to tell your employer in writing, don't just tell them in person, because by telling them in writing means it triggers a series of events, which means you are eligible for the maternity leave and the statutory maternity pay. So make sure you get that in either physical letter or in electronic email. I would just suggest is having a list of questions to give your employer, as that will help you make certain decisions about having a baby and how it will affect your work life before and after. For example, you might want to consider flexible working hours, and you might have the baby and you might decide to work part-time or work your hours differently from the ones that you already are as a result of working around you bringing up the baby. All your expectations might not be met, and that might not necessarily be anything against you. It could just be the restrictions on your employment. So try and keep an open mind. Go with lots of different options on flexible working hours, and that way you can come to some agreement with your employer where you're both going to be happy. So you might want to talk about who and how you're going to cover your role when you're away. So if, like me, you work in healthcare industry, or if you work in a company where you've got certain clients, then you might want to talk to your employer about how these can be covered. And something that's really, really useful to ask is how much annual leave you've accumulated. So for the NHS, where I work, you can accumulate your annual leave in the year or the time that you have off on maternity leave. So you need to take all your unused annual leave before you go on maternity leave, else it will be wasted. And when you come back, you would have accumulated it all whilst you're away. I know, it's great, isn't it? So what you might find is that if you've accumulated a lot of annual leave, you might want to take that before the baby is due as an extra little bit of time off, so you're not digging into your maternity leave. Again, on the other side is that because you've accumulated it, quite often employers let you tag the accumulated annual leave on the end of your maternity leave, so you get an extra bit of time off. So again, this is something you might want to look at in your maternity leave policy for a bit more information. So that's it. That's my little spiel on how to tell your boss that you're pregnant. Next time, I think I'm going to be talking about maternity wear. Not clearly the most fashionable person ever, but there's a few little tips I really wish I had known before buying or accumulating loads of unnecessary maternity clothes or postnatal clothes, which I really wish I'd known before. So I'm going to just talk about that for next time and give you some little handy hints on how to get the best out of your maternity wear. So I will see you next time. Bye.